I didn't even have time to fake a smile before it hit me. At least I won't end up like her single with a kid. That's what my cousin Alyssa said. Glass raised eyes locked on mine like a sniper pulling the trigger at a wedding rehearsal dinner. And then laughter, real laughter, the kind that makes people lean forward and slap tables and snort into their wine glasses. I sat frozen. I didn't blink. I didn't move. Just tried not to pass out from how loud the blood was rushing in my ears. The waiter had just cleared the appetizer plates. There was soft jazz playing. The wine glasses were catching the light just right. It was supposed to be a classy night, and I was supposed to keep my mouth shut and blend in. That's what my mother told me on the phone. Just be polite, don't start anything, smile and eat something decent for once. She didn't say it in a mean way. Just in that tone she uses when she's pretending it's not about me, when it obviously is. So I went. I squeezed into a dress that barely zipped and borrowed a pair of nude heels from my neighbor. My son Milo picked out the necklace, a little silver heart charm. "It looks like mine," he said. I almost cried just from that. The dinner was at this upscale restaurant, downtown, velvet chairs, candles at every table, waiters who only speak in whispers. Alyssa's side of the family had rented out the private room. There were name cards at each seat, monogrammed napkins, a slideshow of their couple photos on loop in the corner. She looked perfect, of course. Tight silk dress, spray tan, white teeth, perfume you could smell from across the room. When I walked in with Milo, she hugged me like I was some distant cousin she barely remembered. "I'm so glad you could make it," she said, smiling with just her lips. Then, as soon as she saw I didn't bring a date, "Oh, just you and the little guy. Just me and the little guy." That's how the night started. They put Milo at the kids' table with chicken tenders and a coloring book. I was seated near the end of the long, white-draped table, tucked between my mother and Aunt Karen, who spent 10 minutes showing me her dog's Halloween costume on her phone. I smiled. I nodded. I sipped my water and tried not to count the exits. Across the room, I noticed Alyssa's fiancé Caleb. He stood kind of off to the side, talking with someone near the bar. He looked tired. I remembered thinking, he's not smiling. Why isn't he smiling? I watched how he kept checking his phone. How his laugh looked a little forced. Meanwhile, Alyssa worked the room like she was on the red carpet. She floated from group to group, sipping champagne, tossing her hair, touching arms. Everyone fawned over her. Everyone clapped when her dad toasted their beautiful future. And I just sat there, nodding, smiling, waiting for it to be over. I wasn't angry exactly. I'm used to being invisible at family things. I don't bring much to the table, not the kind of success this family celebrates. No husband. No home with a lawn. No career with a title. Just a kid, a tiny apartment, 2 jobs, and a spine I'm still learning to stand up with. But that toast, that moment, it broke something. She didn't even hesitate. She tapped her glass with a fork, waited for silence, then said it like a punchline she'd been waiting to deliver all night. "I just hope our marriage lasts. I'd hate to end up like some people, single with a kid." And then she laughed. And so did everyone else. My mother let out a short chuckle. My uncle, her dad, actually slapped the table. And I sat there, with my hands in my lap, with my breath caught in my throat, with my eyes fixed on the centerpiece, like maybe if I stared hard enough, I'd disappear. That was the moment. The moment I realized they weren't just ignoring me. They were laughing at me. And they didn't even care that I heard. But what none of them knew was that someone else heard it too. And he wasn't laughing. I should have left after that toast. I should have stood up, grabbed Milo, and walked out without saying a word. Just let the door close behind me and never answered another family text again. But I didn't. I stayed. Not because I wanted to, not because I had anything left to prove, but because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. That's what it felt like. A game. And I'd been playing it for years without realizing. The rules were simple. Don't be too loud. Don't take up too much space. Don't remind anyone that you failed at the one thing women in this family are supposed to get right: a man, a marriage, a neat little life. The first time I realized I was less than, in their eyes, it wasn't even after I got pregnant. It was years before, when I turned down a law internship because I couldn't handle the hours and panic attacks. My mom told me I'd regret it, that I was throwing away a golden ticket. I told her I just wanted to breathe. She told me I was being dramatic, After Milo was born, the narrative shifted. No longer bright, but misguided. Now it was cautionary tale. At Christmas dinners, I got seated with the kids. At reunions, people asked me if I was still freelancing, like it was code for unemployed. Nobody ever asked how Milo was doing in school, or how I managed to keep us afloat when his dad vanished 6 months into the pregnancy. They didn't ask because they didn't want to know, because knowing would mean admitting that maybe I was doing something right, and that didn't fit the story they'd written for me. So yeah, I stayed. I stayed in that chair after Alyssa's toast, even when my ears were burning and my throat was tight. I looked at my mother. She wouldn't meet my eyes, just swirled her wine like it was something to hide in. Aunt Karen leaned over and whispered, "You know Alyssa. She's always been a bit theatrical, like that made it better." And Uncle Doug, Alyssa's dad, added, "Well, it's just true. Men don't want to raise someone else's kid. That's just nature." That one nearly made me choke. He said it like we were discussing used cars, like I was some dented lemon someone had driven off the lot and returned, and now no one wanted. I wanted to throw my water in his face. I wanted to scream. But instead, I smiled. That same tight, tired smile I'd perfected over the years, because that's what I'd been trained to do, survive quietly. I excused myself and went to the bathroom. I locked the door and sat on the toilet lid and stared at the marble tile until my breathing slowed. I didn't cry. I wish I had. Instead, I laughed. This hollow, humorless thing that scraped the back of my throat. Because I knew deep down that I had let them do this for far too long. That I had played along with the whole charade, trying to be palatable, trying to keep the peace. And for what? So I could sit in a room and be the joke. When I came back, the main course had just been served. Steak, asparagus, mashed potatoes piped like frosting. I couldn't eat. I cut the meat into tiny pieces I didn't plan to touch. Milo waved at me from the kids' table, beaming. I smiled back. He had no idea. Thank God. The table conversation had shifted to honeymoon plans. Alyssa was talking about Bora Bora like she had invented it. "My aesthetic is barefoot luxury," she said. And I swear someone actually nodded like that was a legitimate personality trait. I half listened. Tried not to look at Caleb. He sat there, hands folded, expression unreadable. Then it happened again, the second jab. "I told Caleb he has to give up his Xbox before we get married." Alyssa laughed. "I'm not marrying a gamer. I'm marrying a man." More laughter. It wasn't about me, technically. But the timing, the tone, it all felt the same. Like everything she said had a subtext, and the subtext was always, "I'm not like her. I chose better." It was always about proving she'd done it right, and I'd done it wrong. The rest of the night blurred. Toasts, speeches, more wine. My mother fidgeted with her bracelet like it was a rosary. My aunt complimented Alyssa's dress for the 4th time. Someone asked if I was dating again. I lied and said I was focusing on work, but really I was focused on not shattering. Then, near the end of the dinner, someone brought out a slideshow. Photos of Alyssa and Caleb vacations' birthdays, matching Halloween costumes. It played on loop while dessert was served. No one noticed me anymore. I'd become furniture, background, a warm body in a dress that didn't quite fit. And maybe that was the worst part. Not the insults, not the jokes, but the absolute ease with which they dismissed me. Like I didn't matter, like I'd never mattered. I glanced at Milo again. He was drawing something, a spaceship, I think. He looked peaceful, unbothered, like the world was still kind. And that's when I felt it. A slow boiling rage under the surface of all that silence. Not at Alyssa, not even at my mother. At me, for letting it happen, for spending years pretending I deserved their scraps, for shrinking so they could stretch out, for teaching my son, even accidentally, that his mother was someone who tolerated being invisible. And that's when I looked up, at Caleb, and realized he wasn't laughing. Not during the toast, not during the jokes, not once. He looked uncomfortable. More than that, he looked pissed. And when he stood up quietly, suddenly, like a decision had just landed, I knew something was about to break. Caleb didn't say anything right away. He just pushed his chair back and stood. No toast glass in his hand, no smile, no polite excuse. Just stood like the room suddenly got too small. The laughter hadn't quite died yet, but it hiccuped. It staggered. Forks stopped midair. Someone dropped a spoon. Alyssa blinked, confused. Caleb, she said, all teeth and discomfort. But he didn't answer her. He walked around the table, not fast, not dramatic, just slow and direct, like he wasn't performing, like he was just done pretending. And he didn't stop until he was standing next to me. Not across the room, not a few feet away, right beside me. Every conversation froze. 20 pairs of eyes turned and locked onto us, like we were a glitch in their polished reality. Like no one had written this into the script. I looked up at him terrified. Not of him, of what he might say. I didn't want more pity. I didn't want some backhanded "you're stronger than you know" kind of speech. I didn't want to be defended like a wounded animal. But that's not what he gave me. He turned to the room. I think they should know something, he said. Silence. The kind that hurts in your ears. The kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. Even Alyssa didn't interrupt. Not yet. Caleb glanced at me, then at the rest of them. He cleared his throat. I've known Naomi for 3 years, he said. And for most of that time you didn't even notice. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. But every word landed like a brick through stained glass. When I lost my job in tech, I fell apart, he said. No one here noticed. No one asked. You all just assumed I was busy. Or maybe you just didn't care. Alyssa opened her mouth, but he kept going. She told me to snap out of it, he said. Her dad said I needed to man up. And Naomi was the one who showed up. Now every eye was flicking between us, some in disbelief, some in dawning guilt. She checked on me every week, Caleb said. She helped me clean up my resume. She sent job leads. She even watched my niece when I had an interview. And she never once made me feel like a burden. He looked down like he was remembering something private. I never thanked her properly, he said. But I won't sit here and watch her be laughed at by people who couldn't hold a fraction of her weight. You could hear the soft hum of the overhead lights. The air conditioner kicked on like it didn't know what else to do. Alyssa's face had gone rigid. Are you serious right now, she said. Her voice was high brittle. This is my engagement dinner. Caleb looked at her like she was a stranger. Like she'd just confirmed something he'd been suspecting for months. I'm being serious, he said, and I'm being honest. Aunt Karen coughed into her napkin. Uncle Doug shifted in his seat, then muttered, He's just emotional. Don't take it so seriously. Caleb turned toward him. You want to talk about emotion, fine. Let's talk about what it actually takes to raise a kid alone, to work 2 jobs, to survive without help or applause. That's not emotion. That's strength. I felt it then, something cracking, not just in the room but in me. For years I had believed that strength looked like silence, like endurance, like smiling while people misunderstood you. But Caleb was standing in a room full of people who never saw me and telling them what I never could. And somehow that was stronger than any speech I could have given. Alyssa stood now too. This is insane, she hissed. You're embarrassing me. No, he said calmly. You did that on your own. Another crack, bigger this time. She looked around, waiting for someone to come to her rescue. But no one did. Not even her mom. Not even my mother. They all just sat there. Some fidgeted. Some looked down. No one dared speak. Caleb turned back to me. You didn't deserve that, he said. Any of it. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I just nodded. I could feel the tension unraveling inside me, like a coil being loosened for the first time in years. For so long, I had been waiting for someone to say I mattered. And now, someone finally had not in whispers, not behind closed doors, but in front of the exact people who had written me off. And not for what I'd suffered, but for what I'd done. For how I'd lived. Not broken, not pitiful, just real, strong. Then Caleb said something I'll never forget. Maybe if you spent less time performing perfection and more time actually listening, he said, looking right at Alyssa, you'd understand why that matters. She stared at him like he'd slapped her, but she didn't say anything, because there was nothing left to say. That silence. It wasn't just awkward, it was surrender. Everyone in that room knew the story had changed, and they couldn't take it back. My mother looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it, in her eyes, guilt, recognition, maybe even a little shame, for all the times she told me to keep quiet, to be nice, to not stir the pot. I didn't expect an apology, not from her, not from Alyssa, not from anyone, but I didn't need one, not anymore, because for the first time I wasn't shrinking in my chair. I was standing in someone else's strength and realizing I had plenty of my own. I didn't say anything dramatic when I stood up. I didn't deliver a final blow or throw a glass or storm out like some scene in a movie. I just stood, quietly, calmly, like someone who realized she no longer needed to stay in places that asked her to prove her worth. I walked to the kids' table, where Milo was still humming softly, coloring his spaceship. He looked up and smiled like nothing in the world could touch him. He held out his drawing like it was treasure. "This one's for you," he said. And it was. All of it. Every late night, every skipped meal, every time I bit my tongue to make sure he didn't carry the weight I did, it was all for him. I looked around the room one more time. No one was laughing anymore. Alyssa stood stiff and silent beside Caleb. My uncle had the grace to finally look ashamed. My mom stared at her half-empty wine glass like it might explain something she didn't understand. "I think we're going to head out," I said. I wasn't talking to anyone in particular. I wasn't asking permission. And then I left. Just like that. I expected the air to feel cold when I stepped outside, but it didn't. It felt clean. Like the moment you open a window in a room that's been sealed too long. Milo skipped ahead, a little waving his picture like a flag. I followed behind him, heels clicking on the pavement, still in my dress, still in borrowed shoes. But something about me was different. Straighter, looser, lighter. I didn't realize how heavy it had all been until I set it down. All the years of swallowing my voice, of trying to be small enough not to offend, of measuring my value against a yardstick designed to keep me permanently behind. Gone. That night was supposed to remind me of what I lacked. Instead, it showed me what I had. A child who adored me, a stranger who saw me, and a strength I had almost forgotten I was allowed to use. When we got home, I tucked Milo into bed. He was asleep in minutes, clutching a stuffed astronaut. I sat on the floor next to him for a long time, just watching his chest rise and fall, the kind of peace only kids get to have. Then I went to the living room, still in that same dress, and just sat. I didn't cry. I didn't scroll my phone. I just let the quiet wash over me like a warm bath. At 11:08 p.m., my phone buzzed. It was my mom. "I'm sorry." That was all it said. And honestly, it was enough. Not because it fixed anything, but because it cracked something. Something that had been sealed in me so long, I didn't know where it ended, and I began. It meant she saw me. Maybe for the first time in years. But I didn't need it like I used to. I didn't clutch it like a prize. Because that night, the one that was supposed to break me became the one where I walked out whole. In the days that followed, I kept waiting for the fallout, for someone to reach out and say I had embarrassed the family, that I'd made a scene, that I'd ruined Alyssa's night. But no one did. Maybe they knew better. Maybe they didn't care as much as they pretended to. Maybe they realized the story had shifted and they weren't the heroes in it anymore. Alyssa didn't text, didn't call. I saw a photo of her and Caleb on Instagram a week later, matching sweatshirts, holding iced coffees, smiling too wide. The caption said, "Building a life together with someone who always has your back." I didn't like the post. I didn't roll my eyes. I just scrolled past it. Because that wasn't my story anymore. I wasn't the supporting character in their perfect narrative. I was the main character in mine. Finally. A few weeks later, I applied for a new freelance contract I never would have had the guts to go for before. It was double my usual rate. I got it. Then I raised my other client rates too. I lost one of them, but the rest stayed. And I made more money in 2 months than I had in the last 4. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I journaled in the morning. I made real coffee instead of instant. I even started teaching Milo how to cook little things, eggs, grilled cheese, oatmeal. And every night before bed, he'd ask me, "What made you strong today, Mommy?" The first time he asked, I laughed. "What made me strong?" "Yeah," he said. "You always tell me I'm strong, but I want to know what makes you strong." I didn't know how to answer, but then I did. Leaving the table, I said, "That made me strong." A month after the dinner, I got a text from an unknown number. "Hi. I know this is unexpected, but can we talk?" It was Caleb. I stared at it for a while. Not because I didn't know how to respond, but because I didn't feel nervous. Not like I used to. Not like I always did when someone reached out and I couldn't predict what they wanted from me. I just took a breath and wrote back, "Sure. Just talk right." "Of course," he replied. "Tomorrow." We met at a park, one of those quiet ones, with too many trees and not enough benches. Milo was with a friend's mom. I wore jeans and a hoodie, and didn't bother with makeup. It felt good to just show up exactly as I was. When Caleb arrived, he looked different, not in some dramatic way. He just looked lighter, like someone who had finally told the truth after holding it in too long. He handed me a coffee without asking what I wanted, and somehow got it right. Oat milk, no sugar, just how I like it. We sat on a bench. There was no awkward buildup. He didn't fidget. He didn't small talk. He just said I meant every word. I nodded. I know. I think you changed something in that room, he said. Not just for yourself. I took a sip and looked at the ducks in the pond. You know what's weird, I said. I didn't say a single word. You did all the talking. But you stood, he said. You walked out. You didn't let them shrink you. I laughed quietly. I've let them shrink me for years, maybe he said. But not that night, and not anymore. We didn't talk about Alyssa, not directly. He didn't tell me what happened after. I didn't ask. It didn't matter. This wasn't about her. It was about me. About a woman who finally stopped trying to earn her family's respect and decided to start respecting herself. That was the real shift. Not some big fiery confrontation. Not a grand ending. Just peace and the absence of shame. That night gave me back something I didn't even know I'd lost the right to own my story out loud. And slowly my life started shifting to match that inner change. I took more space. I said no to things I used to say yes to out of guilt. I made new friends, women like me, raising kids alone, trading survival stories like currency. I took Milo on little adventures, nothing fancy, just us, and a packed lunch, and time that felt full. We weren't rich, but we were free. And for once, that felt like enough. A few months later, my mother asked if she could visit. She brought Milo a box of Legos and brought me a small photo album. Inside were pictures of me as a kid, birthdays, beach trips, Halloween costumes I barely remembered. She sat with me on the couch and said I should have defended you. I didn't say anything, just let her sit in that. Then she added, you were always stronger than I knew. And I think I was jealous of that. That cracked something else. But this time it didn't hurt. It healed. I didn't need her apology to move forward, but I wasn't going to reject it either. Sometimes healing doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes it's quiet. Like someone saying, I see you for the first time, and meaning it. And Alyssa, she never reached out. I never expected her to. I don't know if she and Caleb stayed together. I don't check. I don't need to, because I'm not angry anymore. I'm not carrying their weight. I'm not replaying what I should have said or could have done. That night used to loop in my head like a punishment. Now it plays like a milestone. The moment I stopped surviving and started living. The moment I walked out, not as an act of defiance, but as an act of self-respect. I didn't need a mic drop. I didn't need revenge. I just needed to see myself clearly. And now I do. If there's one thing I hope someone else hears in this story, it's this. You're allowed to leave the room. You're allowed to take your child's hand and walk out of the place that made you small. You don't need to scream. You don't need to win the argument. You just need to know you're worth more than staying silent. Because the most powerful thing I ever did wasn't fighting back. It was standing up, breathing in, and walking away, without looking back. I didn't walk out to prove a point. I walked out because I finally saw that staying silent in rooms that diminish you isn't loyalty, it's self-abandonment. That night wasn't about revenge or getting the last word. It was about reclaiming my right to exist without apology. I don't need their applause to know I'm enough. I just needed to stop shrinking and start standing. And if you've ever been the one they laughed at, just know you don't have to stay. You're allowed to leave. And that alone can be the loudest truth you'll ever speak.